it should be recording video.
Okay,
now.
yeah,
You got
it's
it?
now recording as a video.
So I'm recording now, and I'm just going to mute my.
Okay.
Just I'm not here.
Thank you, Louisa. And the only other thing that I'll say to you, Afua, is for this, because everybody and their sister are recording Zooms at the moment. One thing that I've noticed that people aren't saying, and maybe this is the director of me kicking in, when you are talking, if you don't look at the screen and you look at your camera, your eye line will be, it's a small change, but it makes it so much better because for someone holding this and watching it on their phone, it's almost as though you're talking to them.
Yeah. All right, I will make eye line with the camera.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And by the way, your ring is incredible.
Oh,
That's
thank
amazing.
you. You know, this is made from like melted down Chinese bicycle locks in Kenya. I just like, there's some guy, he just goes around collecting all the abandoned like crappy Chinese bicycle locks, melts them down and makes them into jewelry. I love it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, that's super cool. We'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Okay.
All right, let's do this. We are recording, so I'll keep an eye on time, and we'll probably run till about midday or just after, if that's okay.
That's fine, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Afua Hirsch, welcome to Pass the Mic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Reggie.
Yes, no, it's amazing to have you join, particularly in this moment and so early doors when it comes to where we are with Pass the Mic, because we're just getting started. And, you know, this is an initiative that's been built to support, educate, and I guess showcase diverse, young, creative talent. And talking to you is an absolute privilege. So let's get straight to you and what it is you do. And one of the most recent things that you've done that I think has huge impact on our theme today. So our theme is allyship. And as an ally, I think we all have a responsibility to help and to stand up for and to speak up on behalf of people that need our support. So with your book, British, I think in a way it was almost like a rallying call for people to be allies to those who identify as British but happen to be people of colour. So can you sort of expand on that a little bit in terms of what allyship means to you and why British as a book that people can buy is so important?
Yes, and thank you for asking me to do this, Reggie, and I'm super excited that you're doing it, and I love the way you're always thinking about bringing up new talent and a new generation, and it's so energizing to see people who are doing so well, like always thinking about how we can open the space for others. So it's a real honor to be here with you. Do you know, it's funny to talk about allyship because for me, it's actually an example of a new word that I've gained. And my whole journey in talking about race and identity can almost be captured in like the language that I've been able to develop over years. Because when I was writing my book and I was writing about microaggressions and othering and systemic racism, these are all concepts. Oh, and imposter syndrome is a really good one. These are all concepts that I did not have words for when I was growing up. And I think obviously being able to name something doesn't solve it, but it's the first step to being able to understand how these systems work. If you can't name it, you can't articulate it, it's so much harder to work out how you can change it. And I love the fact that I'm always developing and gaining new language. So allyship is actually something that I don't think, even at the time of writing my book, I didn't have such a concise word for it, but it's absolutely what I was trying to convey, because I think my experience, and I've never claimed to have a universal experience of what it's like to be Black in Britain, and we all have our stories. Mine was a very privileged one in many ways. I grew up in Wimbledon, it's very affluent. I went to a private school, it's very white, and I was surrounded by a lot of well-meaning white people who would be absolutely horrified if you ever called them racist, but who were, because they didn't interrogate or learn about how this society is racialized, but they perpetuated things that had a racist effect. And because they didn't ask themselves about how that worked or how they were involved in it, they couldn't be allies. And I think for me, one of the ways that summarizes in the thing that was said to me growing up, which is people saying, I don't see color, I don't see race, it's fine. And I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to say there are these people who are racist and I'm not one of them. You know, they were trying to distance themselves from people who are kind of enthusiastically committed to racism. And those people obviously exist. But that's not, in my opinion, the biggest problem that we face. I think the bigger problem is people who don't want to see, who shut their eyes to a system that distributes opportunity and wealth and resources based on race. And if you don't see it, then you can't be part of changing it. So for me, allyship is that. It's saying I am willing to see these patterns. I'm willing to see how my race or the race of others has affected their life experience, how it creates barriers to a meritocracy and to fairness. And that, to me, allyship is being willing to see that, and then being willing to be introspective about your role in it. And I include myself in that. I think that there are lots of ways in which I have privilege. Like I said, I grew up in a quite affluent area. I'm mixed race. I have color privilege. And these are all things that I think if you want other people to do the work, and often it's quite painful work of asking how they've been complicit in systems that are unfair, you have to be willing to do that yourself as well. So that's allyship for me. And there are so many times when I have been around people who are clearly uncomfortable with what's happening to me, but have not taken a stand. And if they had taken a stand, it would have made so much difference.
Yeah. This is a bit of a left turn, but I think with the conversation being so global at the moment, with everybody being open in a way that they haven't, certainly in my lifetime, how do you think we'll look back and define this moment?
I do think this is a historic moment. It's the closest I've come in my life to feeling like how I imagined it must have felt at previous moments, especially during the 50s and 60s. The civil rights movement, I always wondered whether I would experience a moment where these conversations that we're all having, I mean, we all know people who do this work, who are activists, who constantly call things out and try and change things. But to see that work suddenly be projected onto a massive stage and to be mainstream instead of these conversations that happen at ground level does feel really momentous. And my major thoughts at the moment are around how you can really capitalize on the energy that we have, because we're in the news cycle and everybody wants to be seen to be on the right side of this history. How you can capitalize on that to create longer change, because a lot of the things we're talking about at the moment are symbolism, and I think symbolism is very important. When we talk about statues, we talk about narratives of Britain and Britishness, for example. That in a way is it's a symbol of actual substantive history and unfairness and experiences that people have. So symbols are a good way of communicating to people. If you have a statue of somebody who was racist, who enslaved Africans, it's a kind of byword for all of the ideology that surrounds that person and the patterns of wealth that he had. But obviously bringing down the statue doesn't change people's lives, doesn't change people's outcomes. But for me, because I'm always trying to help people have this conversation or open a space for this honesty, it makes a big difference, because now you can speak about it. And the language that I was speaking about at the beginning, having a better language, being able to name things, more people are being able to name things, more people are self-educating. So I do think that is, I guess it's necessary, not sufficient. It's the beginning, not the end. But it does feel I'm definitely in my own life having conversations that I have never had before with people I've never had them with, and I'm finding and encountering a genuine desire to do what I was saying earlier, be introspective, and for people to ask themselves how are they complicit in patterns of privilege and power that exclude others. And that's really important, because it has to start with yourself. It can't always be this thing over there. And that's what British people have always done. They've always talked about racism as like an American problem. And it's so terrible what happens there. Thank God we don't have anything like that here. And just being able to have that sentiment shows that you don't know Black people, you don't speak to them, or if you do know them, there are things they're not sharing with you because you haven't made yourself an ally. So that is beginning to change.
I was about to ask you about the importance of allies, and then it sort of popped into my head that you were in a position literally a matter of days ago. I don't even know if maybe it was even yesterday, off the back of being on a television program where you were surrounded by people who weren't an ally to you, in a moment where somebody identifying with what was actually going on and finding a way to verbalize the divisive nature of what was being said was so necessary. Can you sort of expand on that a little and just sort of explain the history of that situation? Because I've watched that show in the past and seen you on it and seen similar things come up. So allyship is something that we talk about and something that has been repeated over and over again. But there are so many different ways where being an ally can be of importance, and also in the moment, stepping up and saying, actually, what you just said to that person is wrong. And that was called for as recently as yesterday. Can you sort of explain a little further what happened?
It's really surreal, Reggie, because for the past 3 years, I have been going on these TV debates. They're like current affairs shows where I am often the only Black person. Sometimes I'm the only woman. Sometimes I'm the only person of colour at all. And I'm often in quite a hostile situation where my fellow panelists all disagree with me. And I've noticed something really interesting, because obviously it's a debate. So if everyone agreed, it wouldn't be a debate. So it's fine and normal to have different views. But those panels always make an effort to try and encompass people from a range of political backgrounds. So you'll have someone who's very right-wing, someone who's very left-wing, and people who are in the middle. And I've noticed that when it comes to questions of race, all my fellow panelists subconsciously group together and gang up on me. And it's really interesting, and I don't think they know they're doing it. So when it comes to questions of race, I found myself the only person on my side of the argument. And then what I'm being expected to do is draw on my lived experience of being a Black person to somehow try and persuade them that racism still exists. And what's surreal about it is that I knew that was wrong. And the reason I think it's wrong is that it's kind of sending out a message into the world that that's normal, that it's okay for people to require you to persuade them why your humanity is equal to theirs, because that's really what's happening. And people were watching that and they were finding it entertaining. Like, these shows did really well and people actually enjoyed watching it. And I would always come away feeling a bit sick. And I would tell myself that it's better for somebody who sees and says what I do to be in the space rather than for there not to be somebody making that point. But at the same time, I would feel like, but am I not legitimizing this as a conversation? This is not a legitimate conversation. This is racism, and it's bullying, actually, to put one person against 4 others and have them all try and undermine your message and your lived experience. And what's happened is that I went through that over and over again for years. And then in the last few weeks, overnight, millions of people were absolutely outraged that I was put in that situation. And that's what I mean by the change. I think what yesterday people saw as entertainment, now they see as legitimizing racism. And so in a way, I gained 3 million allies overnight. Whereas in the past, when I was in those situations, there might have been other people who were uncomfortable about it. Did anyone really stand up to say this is not acceptable? No.
Yeah. I think the fork in the sand for a lot of people, which is why it's made the newspapers and which is why it's being spoken about so much online, was the words by the host, Nick Ferrari. Well, why do you actually stay in this country? I believe was what he said verbatim to your face off the back of a conversation about statues immortalizing racists. For him to be able to say that to you and to get the reaction that you've received, what do you think has shifted in terms of people's understanding of microaggressions and covert racism?
And this is what I mean about introspection. So when Nick Ferrari said that, and I think you can see if you watch the clip in my kind of demeanor that I was actually quite hurt that he'd said that, because he's somebody I've been friendly with off air. And it was like the casualness of being able to just say as a first response, if you have a critique of this country, you should leave it. I've never heard that said to a white British person who has a criticism or a critique of this country. And for me, it represents something much deeper, which is I think there is still this idea in the popular consciousness that if you look like me or you, even if you're born here, even if your parents were born here, your presence here is still kind of conditional. You know, it's dependent on good behavior. If you start saying things people don't want to hear or that they find annoying or inconvenient, it's perfectly acceptable for them to tell you to leave. And it's in a way, it's like the most simplistic form of racism. It's saying you're not equal to me, even though we're both British, you're a second-class citizen. And if you violate my terms of your presence in this country, I have the right to say that you don't belong here anymore. And, you know, that's a subconscious thing that played out, I think, in what he said. But it's also become government policy. And that's what's really dark about this moment. You know, we have a government that is willing to strip people of their British nationality, even if they don't have another citizenship, because they have been involved in behaviour that the state finds unacceptable. Now, it's not to condone some of these acts, for example, joining IS, or being involved in terrorism. The point is, if you're British and you commit a crime, you should be processed through the criminal justice system in Britain like any other British person. The idea that you can strip someone of their Britishness because you no longer find them palatable is really sinister. So I think, when Nick Ferrari says that, it was personally hurtful, and I felt like it represented what people have been getting away with in the mainstream media. But then part of me as well knows that it's just a window into something that has much more power, which is government policies that are literally capable of stripping people of their citizenship. And I suppose the most disturbing example is really the Windrush generation. These people who were unequivocally British, who were being, in some cases, deported to countries they did not know because the government felt that they were vulnerable and they could get away with it, and that's this time. So these are the things that I would like to see change. I would like broadcasters to stop thinking that bullying or saying racist things to a person on TV is an acceptable form of entertainment. I would like that to stop, but I would also like governments to stop being able to exploit and abuse Black and other ethnic minority people in a way that they would never, ever treat white British people, because that's real and that's still happening.
Well, allyship has certainly come to the fore off the back of this situation in particular, because as you said, overnight, millions of people watching realised that there was something wrong with what was said, and social media has played a huge part in that conversation as well. And speaking of social media and allies, I'm sure that you've noticed it, and I'm sure your eyebrows raised and at points your eyes roll back in your head when every brand under the sun suddenly had something to say about race and racism through a tiny little square that was black, or a small statement about supporting the cause. Whereas when it comes to their setup, or when it comes to their business practices or their hiring or their history, it may not necessarily tie in with their message on social media. So given the current moment that we're in and the pushback that these brands have had when it comes to their performative activism and allyship, what, in your opinion, is the right way for people to be allies moving forward? In my humble opinion, seeing something like Sesame Street, for instance, and what they did with Elmo, and having that honest discussion in a way that Elmo's audience could understand, is allyship to the 10th power. That is beautiful and what should be done. We all can agree on when it's being done incorrectly, so let's not focus on that. Do you have any examples of it being done right, or do you have any ideas as to how allyship from a brand perspective or a channel perspective or a content creation perspective can be done in the right way?
Yeah, I think there are examples of doing it right. I think it was the University of Edinburgh. Decided to last year launch a review of how money from slave traders had actually played a foundational role in building the university. And they really went in. They kind of conducted this forensic audit of their history and their funding. They published the report, which was pretty damning. And then they said, we want to put money into Black students to try and rebalance the odds in their favor, and as well as renaming buildings and being more transparent. And I think that's what it's about. It's about acknowledging your history as a company or a brand, and not just this kind of optical allyship, as you said, of just saying the right things. Well, how has the history of your brand, your employment practices, your marketing, how has it fed into the problem? And then what are you going to do about it to make things substantively fairer? And I think that if these brands and organizations really reveal where they're at by how far they're willing to go. And I don't know about you, but I am quite enjoying seeing people call out the ones who are just doing it in a superficial way. It just feels like a form of justice, They always get found out, and you can't fake being committed to allyship. You might think you can, but eventually you get found out. And I think for me, it is about action and resources. When I heard these businesses who were founded because of slave trading profits or practices saying that they wanted to do something nice for BAME communities, it really showed that they don't even understand what this history is, who it affected. What are BAME communities? And what does that have to do with the slave trade? So they need to be serious about it. And I think that it's got to start with actually acknowledging their role. And it's very frustrating when people want to talk about other people's racism or racism over there, and they don't want to be introspective about how they've played a part in it. So for me, allyship's got to start with that honesty. It's really got to start with that honesty, and it might be painful. And, you know, not doing that deprives all of us of an understanding of how this country actually came to be built on Black people, you know, their businesses, in the sectors like finance and insurance, the universities, the music institutions. British people have come to believe this myth that there are no Black people in our history because each individual one of these organizations quietly erased their own story. So getting those stories back and reinserting them is actually a powerful act of allyship. And that's what I'm interested in. Even if it is not flattering or unattractive, that's where it counts. It doesn't count if you say something that you've done that makes you look good. It counts when you're willing to say the things that are maybe counterintuitive. And they might think that that will damage their brand, but I personally think that the integrity of being willing to say, we did this, we still do this, and we want to change, will actually bolster them in the long term. So I think it just takes that kind of courage. And this is also where the fact that Black people don't work at senior levels in these organizations also starts to show through. Because I've spoken to so many of these corporations, and there'll be Black people there who will say quietly, I've been pushing for this. You should hear the conversations that take place. I'm not listened to. I don't have a voice, or there's too much at risk for me to really speak.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
also hiring Black people in a tokenistic way, not promoting them, not giving them power, putting them in a position where they feel insecure in terms of their career and their employment means that you're, as a business, losing out on the intelligence you could be getting from the Black people in the room. So all these things are kind of coming together with actual business consequences, which is good. It's what we need.
Exactly. And this conversation is so needed, and I'm so pleased that we've been able to have it on this platform because, you know, the people that are followers of Pass the Mic, the people that follow me on social media are all hungry to hear exactly the things that you're saying. And hopefully as a result, we will see some progress and some change. And Afua, I can't thank you enough for joining me today
Thank
to have
you,
this
Reg.
conversation.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And thanks for doing this.
No, thank you so much for joining us. And I can't wait to speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Me too.
Hey, look at that.
So much.
Oh,
That was
over.
Sorry, I
Look fast.
rabbited on. I can't believe the time's gone already.
Yeah, that was awesome. But